They always came out of nowhere. Unannounced, a serrated crown appeared in the field of my vision, glistening all over, moving slowly from the right to the center, growing bigger and bigger. And the pain. I thought my head would explode. Usually I sought refuge in one of the darker rooms in our house, and curtains were drawn, and I slipped into my bed, waiting for the episode to pass. Chusa was always so sweet. He wouldn't allow our servants to wait on me, but he himself insisted on making the tea and covering my head with a cold, wet cloth. Chusa, he really is the love of my life. Well, to be precise, I have two loves. And please don't get me wrong, I revere my husband, but there's another man in our marriage, so to speak. But it's not the way you may think. I probably better start at the beginning. Now, I was born and raised in a rather small and unassuming place, not far from Cana in Lower Galilee. Enjoying a peaceful childhood, I used to roam the rocky terrain in our neighborhood, admiring the beautiful wildflowers and watching the birds migrating to and from Africa. Upon returning home from my wild excursions, Mom always had fresh watermelon and pomegranates ready. Fond memories. By God's gracious providence, our God of Abraham and Isaac, I was born into a family of considerable pedigree. My father was an influential figure, not only in our little village, but even in the whole of Galilee, and he constantly sought to strengthen his ties with the Roman rulers. Hence, I was married at a young age to Chusa, whose aristocratic family was connected with the royal court in Tiberias. I was far too young to realize what this all meant and what marriage involved and what it was like to be a wife, leading a large household with so many servants and maids. It was a steep learning curve, I can tell you. And I really don't want to think back to these stressful times. And incidentally, that was when all these horrible headaches began in the first place, and they grew worse each year. Anyway, thanks be to God, Chusa turned out to be the most excellent choice. I clearly see God's hand in this. May his name be praised forever. Chusa was smart. Well, he still is. It wasn't love at first sight. Again, I was far too young to understand what love was all about. But it didn't take long for me to fall in love with him, and as it happened, the feeling was mutual. Marrying Chusa meant moving to Tiberias, which wasn't easy, especially at the beginning. I missed my parents and my siblings terribly, and Tiberias was a strange place. Half a day's walk from Nazareth. It was a fairly young city, as it has been founded only about 10 years before we settled there. How can you move to Tiberias? What's wrong with you? My friends' piercing questions kept me awake at night, especially at the first few months. Built on a former Jewish cemetery, sacrilege, Roman ruler Herod Antipas established this city with its grand palace at its center. Now, Chusa was one of Herod's key advisors in all things finance. That means he had to handle taxation, property investments, revenue, and so much more. We moved into this impressive new-built mansion just a stone's throw away from Herod's palace. A very short commute for Chusa, who was expected to be on call practically all around the sundial. We had cooks, servants, and maids, and I lived a very atypical life for a Jewish woman in our day and age. I was clearly aware of my special position and considerable privileges from the very start. I had received a considerable dowry from my father, and with Chusa's help, I managed my own wealth, well, quite well. So there we were, a young couple, ambitious, slowly growing together, living together, getting our bearings, in the upper echelons of society. Our circles of friends consisted of political advisors, some spin doctors, and of course aristocrats, many of whom were actually Gentiles, you know. Chusa had converted to our Jewish faith at an early age, and we both attended synagogue as often as we could. Sabbath observance was difficult at times, I want to be honest, and purity laws went out of the window more often than we wanted to. But still, we were, as I would put it, actually devout and sincere in our worship. Although we remained critical of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they themselves, of course, considered us traitors and crossed to the other side of the road whenever they saw us. But I should get to the point. There's something I want to tell you. I'm not here just to talk about myself. Rather, I want to explain how I met him and how he turned both of our lives around. I still remember it like yesterday. It was a regular Monday, and I was busy selecting my attire for the dinner party at the palace this coming weekend. I've never seen Claudius in such an agitated state. Claudius assists me in all things wardrobe. He really is a talent. Now, his family is from the north of Tiberias, on just Lake Galilee, and just an hour's walk away from Capernaum. From his parents and his cousins, Claudius received the news about this miracle worker who was able to heal all sorts of diseases. And there seemed to be no boundaries to what he was able to do. Even the evil spirits obeyed him. And I immediately knew where he was going with this story. Of course, Claudius had witnessed so many of my migraines, and he implored me, "You simply have to go. Trust me, he will make you well." And I pondered it, but I hesitated, unsure as to whether such an important and apparently popular healer/rabbi would care about me. Someone affiliated with the Roman elite. That might put him off, right? I didn't think I stood a chance to meet him. But that weekend after the dinner party, I suffered another one of these grim episodes, and this time was probably the worst I've ever had. And when Chusa brought me my tea later, and he insisted, echoing Claudius, "You must go and see this healer." And they were right. I mean, I really had enough of this crippling pain. So the next day, I put on some modest clothes, and with Claudius's help, and accompanied by 2 guards, I traveled to Capernaum and I stayed with my relatives. In Capernaum, they always had the latest intel about the whereabouts of this rabbi. And then it really happened. It was a Sabbath. I'll never forget. Everybody knew that he used to attend the synagogue when he was in town. You never quite knew where he was, and sometimes his followers were present while he was nowhere to be seen. Only much later did I learn that he often preferred silence, and so he retreated to a hill in order to pray to his Father in heaven. On that Sabbath evening, though, in the synagogue, I saw him sitting right there in the front pew. No one had to point him out to me. For some reason, I simply knew. And then he stood up, and I remember he preached a message, something from the prophets, and he applied the prophet's message to the present, but don't ask me, I can't really quite put it together now. It's all a bit of a blur, because of what happened after somehow overshadows the memory of that evening. Now, once the service had finished, I immediately tried to walk up to him, of course, yes. I'd already prepared my brief and humble petition. I've repeated it in my head over and over again. "Dear Sir, most honorable Rabbi, I know you are a great man of God, sent to do great things to the glory of God. Please, may I," and so on, But I never got the chance to recite my little request. Surrounded by his male disciples, he was rushed to the door, and just as I was almost fainting with disappointment, he turned his head, and as if in slow motion, he looked right at me with that look I'll never forget. And it was as if he spoke audibly to me, but he didn't, because I didn't see his mouth move. It was all in his eyes, and it was almost as if he said, I know you, I know your sufferings, take heart. That was all. But, I mean, you know what it's like, right? I mean, the next day you think, did I just imagine that? Was I being hysterical? Anyway, I couldn't just brush off this short but so significant event. Something had happened, and it seemed I was now required to move ahead and trust God. I went back home the next day to Tiberius, and I told everything to Chusa, and he, always the pragmatist, simply said, well, let's have a cuppa and see what happens. And we saw no more episodes as I'm standing here before you, not even a tiny one. That was life-changing. No more debilitating pain. What a relief, you can't imagine. Now, since I had been raised a polite girl with manners, my first thought was this: I needed to go and thank him, right? Makes sense. I had this urge to see him again. For some reason, I felt that my story was just about to get really exciting, and somehow he was its main protagonist. The healing wasn't a happy ending. It was just introduction. So I had to see him again. And my dear Chusa, he surprised me again and again. When I first told him about my idea to search for him, he was actually immediately supportive. I thought he would make a scene and call me crazy, but he didn't. And I'll never forget him that. Incidentally, got to tell you this too, the rabbi was at work in Chusa's life too. I see that only in hindsight now as I look back. But it is quite obvious. I mean, not long after my healing, Herod invited his courtiers, his officials, and all the chief men of Galilee to his infamous birthday party. I spare you all the gruesome details. My friends Luke, Mark, and Matthew, especially Matthew actually, report the episode in greater detail if you're keen to hear more. To put it briefly, Chusa was present when the head of John the Baptist was served on a platter that night. And poor Chusa, his stomach turned upside down. He was sick in the bathroom all night. That was clearly a turning point, and it made Chusa reconsider everything, reconsidering his ties to Herod, everything. And it was interesting to see how, as the rabbi's fame spread throughout the whole region, Herod grew more and more nervous. At some point, he was wondering whether John the Baptist had returned to life again and was now out to get him. Anyway, that was the last straw, and the time was ripe for me to cross to the other side. We agreed that for now, Chusa was to remain in Tiberias at the royal court, and I would immerse myself into the movement and see how the view was from the inside, really checking out whether he was the real deal. It was a big step into the unknown, as you can imagine. Think about it. I was about to exchange my solid, safe, and comfortable home, my sophisticated friends, for an unstable, itinerant existence in the company of, let's be honest, dubious characters. You wouldn't believe who followed him. Former prostitutes, beggars, simple fishermen, uneducated, and tax collectors. But to be honest, that was also part of the attraction. I started at the fringes and slowly worked myself to the inner circle. Listening to him and witnessing him in action was life-changing, believe me. He was the real deal. And my letters home to Chusa were buzzing with excitement. Soon we agreed that I would use my funds to support this new movement, that was all about spreading the kingdom of God in the here and now. It was captivating. Chusa helped me to sell some of my investments, and I used the funds to support his ministry for a considerable time. Under normal circumstances, it shouldn't have worked. Never. Most of my new companions were poor, not as well educated as I was. And of course, I smelled better. The stench. But let's not go there. We were such a diverse group. But somehow, he managed to keep us together. There were a number of other women around too. While we were not part of the 12, or the boys as we called them, amongst ourselves, nevertheless, he always included us. And he accepted us as core members of his movement. By we, I mean Mary, the wife of Clopas, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. There were others too, and some of us women were actually quite wealthy, just like myself, and we supported the movement with our own means. Of course, this created a bit of tension in our group. I was often amused by the boys who enjoyed debating who was the greatest among them, when we girls were just thinking, well, my friends, we didn't say it out loud, but I thought, well, I wonder who's buying your dinner tonight. It was a bit of an unusual upside-down situation. And we realized that it must have been a little bit humiliating for them at times. Here we were, us girls, the financial backbone of this young and vibrant movement. One ought to remember that we did have significant expenses. At times our numbers swelled to about 100 people on the move, and this needed not just proper planning, but funds to buy food and goods and so on. And we were always on top of things, and we knew that he was grateful for it. Now the messages I received from Tiberias grew more and more worrying. It wasn't easy for Chusa as he continued working for Herod, the fox, as the master always called him. Herod grew increasingly furious about our movement, and poor Chusa was under immense pressure. People talk, as you well know, and the neighborhood has eyes. Have you heard? Chusa hasn't got his house in order. His scandalous wife joined the riffraff. The news headline in the Tiberian Daily Gazette, our own Acta Diurna, read, "Tiberian aristocrat lady joins a band of outcasts." They didn't name names, but of course everyone knew. It wasn't easy for Chusa, but he stayed firm. He always argued that it was important for him to stay in the palace. He needed to have his eyes and his ears in the center of power in order to know what was going on. You never knew what the fox planned next. In the meantime, we were always on the move. We traveled up and down Palestine, going east and west, north and south. He was always on the move, but never restless. He was always active, but never frantic. And we simply watched and learned. And then came the time when he sent us out in pairs, one by one, traveling from one town to another. The boys were preaching the good news on the public square, and we would talk with the women in the market stalls and at wells and at their homes. And we prayed, we healed the sick, and we drove out evil spirits in his name, just as he had told us. I saw much poverty and much pain, and experienced more than one hostile episode of rejection. But then again, sacrificial hospitality that went over and beyond, and incredible stories of liberation. This went on for about, say, 2 years or so. And so much happened in such a short amount of time. We witnessed extraordinary things. But you know what? I mean, what attracted me most about him was not his awesome power and authority, but how shall I put it? The moments that revealed his true character, his meek character. Who has ever heard of a master washing his servant's feet? And this leads me to the really most tragic part of my story. Because there came the time for his final visit to Jerusalem. At first, everyone was so excited, especially the visitors from Galilee who knew him so well and who had witnessed so many of his miracles. He was the anti-hero, the king in the right side up kingdom, riding into the city of David, palm branches and clothes scattered on the ground before him. But soon the mood changed and our world came crashing down. I still can't fathom how it happened so quickly. A few days after the triumphal entry, he was arrested, unjustly trialed, and dragged out of the city like a common criminal, crucified on that cursed cross. And I was right there when it happened. The girls and I would never leave him, and we were with him until the very end. The boys had all fled, but we stuck with him. He handed over his spirit with a loud cry, and he was gone. It was dark, and we trembled together with the earth that shook that night. We were numb with pain. He was taken off the cross and buried in Joseph's new tomb. Joseph was one of us, so we knew where they put his body. On that first day of the week, at the crack of dawn, it was still dark, we, that is Mary Magdalene, Mary of Clopas, and some of the other girls, made our way to the tomb, carrying precious spices and ointments, because we weren't sure whether he had received a proper burial. When we arrived at the tomb, and I could still hear Mary Magdalene scream in astonishment as we realized that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. What had happened? He slowly peeked inside and then went in one by one, but the tomb was empty. We were almost catatonic in consternation, not knowing what to do, what to say, or even what to think. And then while we're still trying to recover from this find, out of nowhere, two figures appeared, flashing with light of a quality I'd have never seen before. And intuitively, of course, we bowed down and worshipped these mesmerizing creatures. And then they said in unison, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Once they had delivered this message, they were gone, vanished as quickly as they had appeared. We rushed back home and told the news to the boys. They were obviously stupefied. They didn't believe a word we were saying, and I think the term hysterical was somehow in the air. It was a bit annoying, to be honest, but we were slowly moving more toward confidence and maybe even fresh hope. I went to Chusa, who was actually still in Jerusalem as he had traveled down from Tiberias to attend the Passover. And at first, he didn't really believe me either. A few days later, though, it was clear to everyone. He had indeed risen from the dead. There he was, appearing to all of us, including Chusa, and then again to even more people. I recognized him immediately, although he looked a tiny bit different. Plus, it seemed that he could move from Aleph to Bet in no time. I had no idea how he did that. And that is how Chusa and I actually became apostles, in the sense that our friend Paul understands it, witnesses to the resurrected Messiah. And somehow this became that's actually why I'm here, this became our vocation. Traveling the country, traveling the world as witnesses to his resurrection. Spreading the news that he is alive. Not long after all of this, his resurrection, his ascension, our brothers and sisters encouraged us to witness as apostles in Rome. What an adventure. Who would have thought? We both spoke a little Latin, hence the choice fell to us. And through our connection with Herod's administrators in Rome, we were put in touch with this small Jewish community there, and off we went. Not as Joanna and Chusa, of course, but renamed Latinized now, Junior and Andronicus. And in Rome we did pioneering missionary work, so much so that our brother Paul even called us outstanding among the apostles. But don't get me wrong, I'm not here to make a name for myself, but to make his name great. By the way, speaking of names, I was named after my father, John, and my name, Joanna, means God is gracious. And that really is the story of my life. God has been incredibly gracious to me. And I wonder, how have you experienced God's grace in your own life? How has the resurrected one made an impact on your life?
On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of the sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles.